So today is the 14th of June, 2022. Just for the clarification as to that. Especially since I just finished listening to the second hearing on which had occurred in the courtroom on the 13th of June. So, thanks for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel, like my official YouTube videos, and go to my website, www.susanmeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribelle.com. Make sure to go through my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, through the time frames of the updates, most specifically in the year of 2019 into the year of 2020 and 2021, so that way you can educate yourself and see certain metaphors in the current time frame of today, the 14th of June, 2022. So, without further ado, I'm just going to go straight into it. So in reference to the 2020 election and how they are talking about the Dominion software, well, in reference to Dominion software, you can utilize the metaphor as to my Medal of Honor art project trips, as to what I was writing about regarding from my updates in the year of 2019 through into 2020 in reference to my Medal of Honor art project trip aspects to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA. Now, I have discussed in official YouTube videos of mine. Make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel in reference to my scuba diving. Now, in my scuba diving, I earned 26 scuba diving certifications, and in a specific aspect of a 3-volume book series, The Adventures of Susan Meling, Scuba Diver Extraordinaire. If you go to the book section of my website, www.susanmeling.com, you can see those 3-volume book series and go through the Amazon links as to that, but make sure to get Finding a Silver Lining, because that would be the most important book to have along with the 3-volume book series of The Adventures of Susan Meling, Scuba Diver Extraordinaire, because that Finding a Silver Lining is extremely important to have in that conjunction. So, what would the various aspects as to the committee meeting of the January 6th event be of importance to scuba diving and my Medal of Honor art project in the metaphors for this sermon monologue lecture situation other than metaphors? So if you take a look at the time frame of, now, I had written in regards of my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribelle.com, about certain problems that I had noticed during the time frame of my Medal of Honor art project trips. Now, during the aspects as to the January 6th committee hearing, as to what occurred on January 6th in the year of 2021, there are a few correlations to that metaphor. So regarding my Medal of Honor art project trips, I had notated in my book, The Modern Day Book, written by me, Reverend Susan Meling, in the book section, again on my website, www.susanmeling.com, about certain things that I had noticed. And so in these references as to certain things that I had noticed during my Medal of Honor art project trips, such as in Seattle, there is a location that has 7 Medal of Honor recipient markers, so on and so forth. And I had spent hours cleaning dog and cat crap off of these particular markers. A lot more time than it took to complete the actual rubbings themselves. And so in conjunction to that, as to how people were not invited to my actual trips, because in order to be invited to my actual trips, that would require specific instructions followed, and not by somebody else at all. They would have to be my specific instructions as to how to travel in whatever vehicles of. So the Dominion software reference could be a metaphor in regards to Old Dominion, which is a semi-truck company. Now, there is the individual who is a former attorney general named William Barr, and there was an individual that I had known in the scuba diving community I nicknamed as Scubuda, named William Talent, or Billy Talent, what have you. And I had actually informed him in the year of 2011, if I remember correctly, during a phone call, where I had informed him an individual he had known named Joe, which said he was in the Army and had been an Army Ranger who had been a part of international regarding scuba diving, who I had to defend myself against when I was engaged to an individual. Now, if you take, I can give you a pop culture reference to the television show Sirens, and the female named Wren, I think was her name, or Wynn was her name. She had flicked a guy into a windshield of a car defending herself. Well, there was an armoire. I don't know if there was a television in the armoire. However, I had to defend myself in a capacity of, and it wasn't until the year of 2011 compared to the year of 2010 when I could figure out what words to make an attempt to utilize in that reference. Now, that individual, William Talent, or in this metaphor to William Barr, had said that there wasn't any discussions about it beforehand, and yet, if Billy Talent had remembered, he had gotten upset because I had informed him in person, face-to-face in person, in the parking lot outside of International, that I was going to have to do something that I really didn't want to do in reference to who I was engaged to at the time. For the first time that I was engaged to him, I didn't get to the point of what I had discussed in reference to the phone call. However, if I remember the phone call correctly, Billy had said that he hadn't heard from Joe since the time frame of that evening with the Corona beer that had bubbles at the bottom of the beer. And since it was known that I had landed at the bottom of the ocean in the Atlantic area, as to not just out from Boca, though to the Vandenberg area, there are those particular factors as to what an anomaly I would be to land at the bottom of the oceanic waters and surface alive safely. And those types of individuals, as to it is considered self-contained or selfish, self-contained underwater breathing apparatus, and any lies such as Billy, because he had been in the Marine Corps and he didn't want to listen at the time frame in the year of 2010, literally less than a week after the situation had occurred where I had defended myself, he threw a temper tantrum because what he remembered from his basic training in comparison to taking in consideration that I would be telling anything of importance during that time frame, similarly, hypothetically, to the metaphor of my Medal of Honor, our project trips. Now, it's important about my Medal of Honor art project trips because I complete historical and spiritual rubbings. And while some people might think, well, they could respect the individual as to my Medal of Honor guys, well, that could be true, and yet at the same time, there's the respect to my work. And so if you actually respect my work, well, then you know that you need to ask me what would be required. It's not a freedom of expression, it's not a freedom of the press, it's not a freedom of anything in reference to following across state lines without my permission. And because of having begun in the state of Washington, well, there are those privacy laws that the state of Washington has. Same thing throughout California and Oregon because of the facts as to the technological advances and the privacy laws, which would be very different from privacy laws within the state of Texas as to the technological aspects. And so while some people might think that in one state it would transfer to another regarding legalities as to technology, well, it's actually in the most strict state that would be the privacy regulations to that. And so since I began my Medal of Honor art project in the state of Washington, it is an extremely strict state as to privacy laws and privacy situations in those particular references, especially in a private residence or even in a private business. As a matter of fact, in the state of Washington, you must inform during each time frame of a discussion. It's not a blanket situation. It is a mandatory per discussion to actually inform every individual involved. Otherwise, there is no consent. And in turn, those privacy laws are mandatory in every discussion at all times. That's why in parking lot locations in the state of Washington, there are those signs that you must pay attention to. Similarly to when you're driving, you want to pay attention to those one-way signs always. So in reference to the 6th of January in 2021 event as to the Washington, D.C. location situation, yes, I had been there early and I had stayed there late because of a multitude of situations that I was working on in reference to the updates to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, which is the same as my website, www.susanbling.com, to ladydoribelle.com, which is who I've always been. Have not hidden that ever. And while some people may have thought otherwise because of whatever hypotheticals of, there are the facts. Now, if in the metaphor as to Trump being in a different capacity as to a different book series that I had authored in reference to Failsafe, the Kennedy curse fused with science fiction fantasy, that particular aspect of in the metaphor to an ex that may have had a fantasy in regards to the fiction that I had simply authored in a creative way, was not ever thinking of that particular individual, which again might be a fantasy of that particular individual and or any individual that that person may have known. Now, in that capacity of Failsafe, it wasn't until the year 2019 that I had learned there is actually a military term called failsafe, which I wouldn't consider that individual to be a failsafe at all. But that's my personal opinion. And again, those updates which began in the year the 2019 into 2020 on my website, www.susanbling.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribelle.com, in my journal blog, The Ornery PSA. Ironically, when I had created my website, www.susanbling.com, I had actually put on some area, I thought it was in my journal blog, though there are issues that I have had with technology, which I've brought forward in discussions before in person, face-to-face in person. Since waking up from my coma after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, I also put it in writing in different journal blogs, as well as different social media locations, in conjunction to finding a silver lining. Now, the importance of that to the 6th of January 2021 regarding the 2020 elections, though also in addition to the January 6th hearings, which the second hearing was yesterday, the 13th of June, 2022. So, for those who remember, in the year of 2020 was the election between who became President of the United States of America, 40-tree, George W. Bush, with Vice President Dick Cheney, as to the election against Al Gore and, if I remember, John Kerry possibly. And so there were a few factors in that reference to the Florida state location as to how people had brought up that they had literally seen when they had voted. They literally saw it. And so I had told people in person, face-to-face, in person, situations that I had seen. As far as in the year of 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. Though I began seeing these situations in the year of 2001. I looked online in reference to the year of 2020. And apparently, through technology, there was something called the I love you virus. Here is an irony. After I woke up from my coma, after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. Now, mind you, when I was a child, my biological mother worked at Prudential doing information technology engineer software design, though it was called just information technology back then. Similarly, back in the 1980s and 1990s, in comparison to the LGBTQP sort of communities, it was just the gay community or the gay and lesbian community in the 1980s and 1990s. Now, I had told people about a nightmare I had when I was in second grade. I had told people about this premonition I had, which turned into 1993 World Trade Center, though because I was a child, and also since waking up from my coma after my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, I do apologize. I've made the best attempts regarding words as to how it was essentially what I didn't know about Oklahoma City in that reference at the same time of what I saw in reference to the 1993 World Trade Center situation, as well as the 2001 attack regarding the 11th of September. And while in comparison to the 1993 attack, I could only do so much. I actually had mono, Epstein-Barr bronchitis, Lyme's disease, and the flu all at the same time, where I was homeschooled the entire time. I actually got in trouble because instead of working on the coding, I had read books because, you know, it was a lot having anybody who's ever had mono. Well, that's a heavy duty situation. I also had Epstein-Barr at the same time, and that in itself is its own issue. And then there was Lyme's disease that I had at the same time, and anybody who's had Lyme's disease knows how that goes. And then bronchitis, as well as the flu. And so I was out of school essentially from September of 1992 to around April or May of 1993. So my biological mother had worked at Prudential and been in information technology. It was known in reference to quite a few situations that every other time that anything really happened, I went to the doctor. And the situations of my biological mother had argued with my pediatrician, who said that the best way would be to have me hospitalized because of the individual situations at that time. However, she wanted to know what would be cheaper, and her version of cheaper was my biological father stopping work as to the School of Bulova certification and all of those watches and clocks that he had worked on, to then go to college, because that seemed cheaper in price to her than the income that he had during that time. Ironically, my biological mother told me you shouldn't have to spend money to make money. I don't know the irony about that. Certain, excuse me, other factors. So, while that occurred, because their viewpoint was, it would be, I'm fairly certain of any state, the state of New Jersey might have some stringent, strict laws about that. As far as those types of medical malpractice, I could be inaccurate, though I'm fairly certain even in the 1990s, that was a heavy-duty penalty. So, could have been in the hospital probably maybe 2 weeks at most. And then I would have been back in school. Instead, my biological mother and my biological father thought it would be less expensive for me to not go to school from that point in time. And even though my biological mother has a bachelor's of science and a master's degree of science in reference to different aspects regarding Rutgers University, well, apparently, those particular hypothetical situations. This again coming from the female who claimed to go to Rutgers University and not ever meet anybody at all. Did that ever, in the state of New Jersey, at a college, doesn't really matter, it's Rutgers University when you really think about it, however, didn't meet anybody in the 1960s or 1970s that ever smoked, her words, the marijuana. In the 1960s and 1970s. At college. Or anywhere in the entire state of New Jersey. In the 1960s and 1970s. She has a half-sister named Chris, who was a proud hippie in the 1960s and 1970s, but she claimed regarding my biological mother there was no one she knew at all, ever, not just when she was in college in New Jersey, but at any point in time, she did not know anybody. Later, around the year of 2010, if I remember correctly, my biological father talked with me about Maui Wowie and Acapulco Gold. I learned that is a strain of what my biological mother would call the marijuana. I'm fairly certain her being married to my biological father, hypothetically, that instantaneously negates that claim she made that she knew no one ever in her entire nobody. Talk about some rose-colored glasses. By a lot in that hypothetical. I don't know why, though I have the sensation I should add that when I was moved with my biological little sister from New Jersey in the year of 1998 into the state of Illinois, my biological mother was excited to apply in Woodstock, Illinois, to any location there. It didn't matter, she wanted to go to Woodstock, Illinois for employment. I personally only can think of Snoopy's little yellow bird friend. However, maybe there are others who have a better idea what that reference could be other than McHenry County Government Center. I wouldn't personally know. I have a sensation that might have been before my time because I was born in the 1980s. So, nonetheless, in the reference as to the 6th of January hearings, If in reference to other people that I once knew in person, face to face in person, as to that Dropbox link, in regards of my first two books, Finding a Silver Lining and Finding the Silver Lining, if anybody claimed in the state of Texas that I had ever given them permission for anything, I did not. I did not ever give anybody permission to do anything without consulting me. So if in the reference of the January 6th hearings, and yes, I had put forward that I authored my books, I created my website, www.susanmeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribelle.com, and it was known as to a lot of different situations, most specifically from the year of 2009 into the year of 2012, as to what I was dealing with, which, yes, I did not bring up Irving in the year of 2011 to people during that time frame of 2011 or 2012 because of everything that I was going through during that time frame, as I explained in my updates in the year of 2019 into the year 2020 and 2021, because of the culmination of situations. So I figured during my updates to my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, well, I might as well just do these updates. I might as well put this all together because I've only had more stuff occur, though I would guesstimate that a bunch of situations had been clarified and verified before the time frame of the year of 2019, especially in the situation as to going to the neighborhood of my first house in San Antonio, Texas, and being informed in that capacity a different way. So in that reference to the updates regarding my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, through my website, www.susanmeling.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribelle.com, if there were any needless problems as to what my biological mother, biological father, and biological little sister had been caught in the year of 2004, which they only moved to the state of Texas in 2003, as to the first amount of times that I had actually been capable to remember catching them telling lies, such as in reference to the marijuana. There were quite a few times I made attempts to warn people in the state of Texas. Then there's those other situations in regards to my ex-in-laws in the state of Georgia, though also Oklahoma, and in the Fort Worth, Texas area. Well before the year of 2007 and 2008, obviously. And so in this terminology I learned, it's called MK Ultra. My ex-sister-in-law, she has 2 daughters. And in reference to that Lackland Air Force Base graduation, as to my original blue ID card, which would be 1 year after the I love you virus that had went throughout all of the technology devices from what little I had read. Then, when you take in consideration as to the algorithms, paying attention to those details, because in the 1980s into the 1990s, obviously not only was there a lot of coding that occurred, there was a lot of information that was put online. And so situations such as me being the original baby Jesus Christ in the 1980s for several years as to where it began, before it went to the Methodist Church, before going to Old Time Presbyterian Church, I was in the garage. Before it went the way it did, and my biological mother was a part of TRF and SCA, for those who understand that. Which is obviously before the Excalibur Fair in the year of 2005, for those who understand that reference. And so in the regards as to the 2000 election, and the fact that there was the situation regarding the I love you virus, well, if in reference to the hypothetical that when I was in Asher Holmes Elementary School, I had told people, which anybody who knows how elementary school or remembers far better than I, as to whatever was discussed with other parents. So I had told people, I believe if I remember correctly, it was in the cafeteria at Asher Holmes Elementary School. So if there were any recording devices at a public elementary school. For that reference as to the irony regarding, well, fail-safe. So in that reference, I had told people that my mom, because of an argument that occurred with my own biological mother, well before I was in 5th grade, by the way, and after I was in 2nd grade, as to a disagreement at Old Tenet Presbyterian Church in reference to the center aisle regarding the original pastor of the church, where General George Washington, during the Revolutionary War, had direct ordered the congregation to put the original pastor there to prevent the British from desecrating his grave. So, in those references, as to those particular factors, my biological mother having been a deacon, and my biological father having been a trustee of Old Tenet Presbyterian Church at that time, well, we had a massively huge disagreement. And since anybody who's met them would know how it is if I say something, and I was a child at the time, the original pastor when I attended Old Tenet Presbyterian Church, Pastor Mackenzie, and I had spoken in the year 2021, if I remember correctly, and he had said the most politically way to describe my biological parents, that they were strict. You know, he was a chaplain in the Army. So anybody who's ever had any politically correct discussions in those regards, and the state of New Jersey, and then for those who didn't understand why I didn't want to get involved in politics when I had been in the Army or fought to be in the Army, and the reasons why I went enlisted in comparison to officer, well, you know, you learn a lot about politics when your biological mother is a deacon and your biological father is a trustee. You learn a lot real quick. And then again, it was the state of New Jersey in the 1980s and 1990s. And so then there's that. And then, of course, going up to the New York City and New York State areas, well, there's a little bit of politics that goes up there. And then there's Pittsburgh and Philadelphia and Pennsylvania and a smidgen bit of politics over there. It's just the Northeast coast. It's only, you know, New Jersey's only near Maryland and Delaware and DC, that's all. You know, what politics happen out there? Other than it's Washington, DC. Just a little bit of politics in those areas of the original founding colonies of the United States of America, such as New Jersey, New York, and Pennsylvania. Just a little bit, you know, just a few here and there. There might be an elected official somewhere. Possibly, I don't want to assume. You know, because it was the 1980s and 1990s, which was before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. However, I'm fairly certain there could have been an elected official somewhere. Nonetheless, I had brought up after this, during school, that, well, my mom, because I had my own IBM DOS computer. And so, you know, for those who know that time frame, you were cool if you had a video game system. You were a boss if you had your own computer. But you know, you were a super boss if you had your own computer and printer, and that was mine. So I had been upset because of Old Tenet Presbyterian Church and that whole thing, and my biological mother and my biological father had made their opinions known, and one of the many times that they had disowned me when I was a child, as far as that was concerned. and the situations as far as my biological little sister, as anybody who's met that. And so, I was disowned. By the time I was in first grade, by the time I was in first grade, I know I had been disowned by them more than 10 times. Yes. For things such as, taking care of the things the way I did, correctly. And so there's that. So I had an attitude. If anybody's ever met an elementary schooler who had an attitude, especially now in the year 2022, I had my own computer and my own printer, which was pretty boss, like major boss at that time. Because again, you were cool if you had, but you weren't boss because you were playing video games. If you had your own computer, you were considered a nerd or what have you, but if you had a printer with that computer, you were a boss. Not just a boss, you were a boss in the 1980s. And I had already, defeated a few video games at that point because of my babysitter and her husband's teenage children in high school. So, I had played video games that people in my elementary school hadn't heard of at that point in time. I had played, Mortal Kombat in the 1980s, and I had played, Mario Brothers in the 1980s. I played Lion King in the 1980s, and I had played Tetris in the 1980s. And so, I was a little ahead of the curve, and all sorts of people at Asher Holmes Elementary School in kindergarten and first grade were like, what type of game is that? Because they knew about Atari. They didn't know about Sega or Nintendo. So, I was considered a nerdy dork during that time frame. And then I had my own computer with a printer. It was an IBM DOS, which, doesn't sound like much in the 2022 time frame at all. That would be the equivalent. So for those who would understand, okay? So Intel Pentium has only recently come out with the 10 version, okay? I had been working in regards of other stuff in reference to Prudential associated stuff because my biological mother had been in information technology. I had gotten up to, I think it was 31 or 32 as far as Intel programming before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. I had, for those particular factors, I have done what I could. I've been called a snob only because of, some people, because I wore corsets to events. They called me a snob for that. And yet, I didn't understand why they called me snobby. Because there were so many things I could have been so snobby about, and for example, that. And then I got called a snob in scuba diving because I had secondary gear. I actually had 2 BCDs because of my type of work. I always needed to make sure I had enough. Because of my type of work, I wasn't about to have any issues that were not capable to be prevented. I was willing, I did, the second BCD, I didn't even spend $150 on, but that is what it is. So I got called a snob for that. And so it was as it was as far as that. I also got called a snob by those scuba divers in the civilian recreational area because I had a British military scuba dive depth gauge. I think it was a 3 or a 4 in one. And so they tried calling me snobby when I got it from International, and it wasn't even new. It was, so if it was new, okay, I could see that. Except I got, like, I'm just saying, you know, if so, you know, if you're gonna call me a snob, let me give you an actual reason. In the 1980s, I had my own IBM DOS computer with a printer, and I had my own computer desk too. You know, okay, and I had an aquarium. That was my own aquarium. If you want to get snobby on that there. Although at the same time now, because it's IBM DOS. However, I could also be, well, at Asher Homes, we had Apple Macintosh computers in the computer lab. So, you know, just saying. It's not really that, you know, whatever now in the year of 2022, but for those who know the years and the time frame as to, oh yeah, I know, I was a super boss. I was a super boss at school. Total dork. But I was a total boss when it came to technology, just saying. And so I had said, because I was very upset, my mom can print any letters perfectly in a straight line. She's so awesome because she can totally do that. I bet Mom, you know, would be so amazing if she could do other stuff too. You know, like prettier writing and stuff, and compare. And she's so, and I went on and on about, you know, that. And then because I am the dork that I am, but I was a child, don't over sensationalize, okay, how awesome my mom is. Be cool. You know, and so those who would know in the 1980s and 1990s, if they were essentially putting in feelings regarding that time frame, I was all, yeah, my mom's awesome because, you know, she can do this and she can do that, and, you know, there's a motherboard and what? You know, because I was that dork. I was that much of a dork, and yet at the same time, you know. So there's also those who know about the Build-A-Bear Company. And so the Build-A-Bear Company, back in the earlier days, they had this little button that was the I love you button. You could put it inside and stuff the teddy bear and stuff like that, and you could press the little area and I love you. Well, that was the only time I grew up hearing it. And so I went to the Freehold Raceway Mall at a point in time, and I had already been to the arcade, and I totally schooled some high schoolers when it came to the X-Men, and with Dazzler. Just pointing that out there. Although I can make the joke now, I totally dazzled them. You don't know, because I totally, when it came to I was that child. So anybody who was in arcades in the 1990s especially, yeah, I was that little elementary school, middle schooler. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. I was one set of quarters, baby. That's right. So yeah, I was that much of a. That's right. Totally pwned that. What is it? The alligator game. Totally pwned it. Top score. You know. that worked at Build-A-Bear, when I had come in and brought that up, they were like, well, we can't really do that because we have to do this, that, and the other. You could build another bear. And I was like, I like my bear that I built, because, you get attached to it and stuff like that. And so then later, for those who remember beepers, pagers, okay, and more importantly, before pagers, if you remember, actual calculators. The old school calculators before the scientific stuff, and you can spell boobies. Is it 8008135, if I remember correctly, and then you turn it or backwards, whatever it is, and then that's because see, even technology likes boobies. See, and so. Pointing that out there because you can spell that. Although maybe it's because of the motherboard. I don't know. Maybe that's why you can spell boobies in comparison. I don't know. And so, just throw that out there. And so then there's the reality as to what you can do. And so in the time frame of 2000, I had already woken up from my coma after my head injury during basic training. Now, I don't remember everything from my basic training. I do remember that I had to fight to get into the Army and all that stuff. I remember having been invited to Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment when I was 12 years old. There were a few other factors to take in consideration as to what possibilities that anybody, especially in the state of New Jersey, which a lot of science and technology, again, Marine and Science Technology School, nonetheless, there's a lot in the area, especially in the 1980s and 1990s. And so when you take that into consideration, and then what I barely can remember, so I can remember as far as fighting to get in and all that, and I can remember the bus ride out there as far as what I thought was Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And so when we had taken off from O'Hare to what was supposed to be Oklahoma City, well, I didn't see any Oklahoma City signs. As far as the airport that we landed in, well, I remember there were paintings on murals in certain areas. That's what I do remember. And then I had researched before going to basic training how long it would take from the Oklahoma City airport to Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Well, we got there at night, and so some people had watches, and I had an analog watch in comparison to other people who had digital watches. And so, and there's that. We arrived 3 minutes before midnight, which I was confused because we should have been there no later than essentially, with traffic, if you take consideration, probably about 1500 or 3 p.m. And instead, it's 3 minutes to midnight and obviously dark outside. And so then the plant life or botany compared to what I've seen in Oklahoma is very different. I remember a guy in a pinstripe suit with a fedora that had a purple and red feather in a red band of his fedora cap. And he was very pale skinned. I mean, you could technically consider him Caucasian, but much paler than any Caucasian I've ever seen. And then there's the bus situation as far as the latrine that I had informed people about. The drill sergeant, when we had arrived, she had been upset about the smell, and I had told her that the latrine had broken on the bus and there was some problem with it. And so I remembered that, and I know I told people about this. In addition to that, then I remember I told people about the female who had braids in her hair that I had taken a stand to defend because it was within the UCMJ as to the natural hair. She didn't have extensions. And there is a difference in regards to how braids are done. Now I know I'm half Chinese and half whatever else. However, my cousin Jade is half Chinese and half African American. Her dad is African American, her mom is Chinese. She immigrated to the United States of America because of my bakgong and my bakpu. She's my bakgong's sister. And so there's that and those capacities. So there were a lot of situations in that regard. I don't know whether or not Jade learned about that sort of stuff at all, but you know, it was as it was. So then in reference to basic training, I remember that I didn't get smoked the way the other females did because I didn't have the amount of, well, I didn't have any makeup, to be honest. They had caboodles full of makeup, and their caboodles full of makeup, per piece of makeup they got smoked for, military, you know, push-ups and stuff like that. And then they also got smoked for the caboodle itself. And then anything that was brought that was in addition that was considered as contraband, I got technically smoked because I brought a second bag of socks. And then I had to explain why. And it made sense because of road marches and stuff like that. And I had extra panties and bras or undergarments because, you know, didn't know what amount of time I'd have as to laundry, or if there was a dry cleaning service. Even if there was, well, would it be back in time? Because then, you know, I could easily see where if you go and send everything out and then whatever, and I could see certain things, and anybody who's actually graduated basic training in comparison to myself, you know, I could see drill sergeants doing certain things that way. And so that's my main memories from basic training. I know there was the PT tests. I know that. I know, you know, I maxed out my push-ups, I maxed out my sit-ups, my 1 mile in comparison to 2 miles, though, you know, we had the sheets as far as that was concerned. I had the equivalent of an 18, I had beaten, actually maxed out the 18-year-old male mile run for that. And then there was the situation, 2 different locations, one in reference to where I had yelled attention, but it came out atten hut because of the vibrations or the way the echoing occurred because of the area as to the buildings. And then there was the demonstration on a different set of bleachers that I could tell there were soldiers that had camo hats, not that they weren't helmets that had the camouflage, but they had bushes and different twigs and stuff like that. And I had called that we were going to see something because of the way the line of trees were and the field area. And so in an irony in reference to the 6th of January, and I had arrived early, I was working on a few things, I had murmured to myself, hadn't been in contact with anybody as far as knowing they were going to be in the area or any planning, like some of the stuff you can see in the 6th of January hearing, I had a vision, I guess is the way to put it, where it seemed that the elected officials would be safer in the streets than they would in the building. And that was upon probably the second or third day that I was in the Virginia area. And so there's that. And I had already brought up that I had sight. And so there's those factors. And it was known in basic training. I had informed my actual recruiter compared to the name Ratcliffe on my paperwork. I don't even know who Ratcliffe is. He might have been somebody else in the office area as to the recruiter station, but he wasn't my actual recruiter. My actual recruiter, so unless it was a name change, so anyone who might know that guy, my recruiter was over 6'3", 6'4", and he had broad shoulders, probably about 210, 220, dark brown hair, stereotypical-ish military haircut, though a little bit longer on the top, not a high and tight, though longer, and he had darker eyes. I think they were green in comparison with some hazel and gold flecks. I think he had one freckle, but other than that, he had a more square shape of a face and a very strict jawline. So I don't know who Ratcliffe is, but that's I don't remember that being the name of my actual recruiter, for clarification. And so that was in Crystal Lake, Illinois, for anybody who might know. And he had really big arms and a fairly broad chest. And so there's that to take in consideration. I was really short compared to him. So he'd be taller than the top part of this compared to me. And I'm, wearing heels. So those are about 3.5-inch heels. So there's that to take in consideration. So I don't know if there's actually a guy named Ratcliffe, but I'm sure maybe, but that's not who my actual recruiter was, I think. And so I know that when I came back at one point in time and I stopped by the recruiter office, I remember seeing him and he was frightened to see me. He was happy to see me, but he was frightened. And so I had informed him, as well as the office, as to what occurred during my basic training. He knew about what my clearance status was because he had sent my paperwork through the facsimile, as far as that was concerned, in the Master Sergeant's office. And so there's that to take in consideration. But during basic training then, we were told it was a demonstration and that an Abrams tank was coming in. And the last thing that I remember from that, I don't remember anything after hearing it was kind of like a sound, which seemed weird to me because I expected to hear a boom. And I did see, the dirt fly up after that, but I don't remember anything else really from that. I don't even remember walking down the bleachers. I do remember the CCC course. I do remember the COC course. I remember going through the tunnel that had the barbed wire over the top, and the drill sergeants spraying water and going through the tunnel and not having any mud on my BDUs, then having to go do it a second time, and only a little bit along here and here as far as that was concerned, and that was it. In reference to the courses, I remember the wooden kind of squarish U shape that was like a larger version of uneven bars but made out of wood, that I had jumped to the first one and then jumped to the second one. And then I remember the weave, which was a pyramid shape, and you have to go over one log under the other log and kind of go upward and then go downward without falling. And that's about it as far as remembering that. And then there were a few classes that I remember having discussions where the situations were about different, well, there was the STD discussion and the projection screen, and then also regarding dependence causing a bunch of needless problems regarding sponsors, and philosophical discussions about that. Then I also remember teaching some of the guys how to do a shine on their boots using a lighter, because at that time in the year 2000, we still had leather boots in comparison to the boots that are around now. And just a few discussions here and there before the palm leaf cross and the yellow sheet of paper for Palm Sunday services, and the situation as to the front office area with the female and asking to see her identification card, the phone call after that, and then the situation the following night, which was my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000. And so in that reference, though, to the 6th of January in 2021, there's the reasons why stolen valor is a problem. And so you have Military City, USA now, which is San Antonio, Texas, though there are those factors. And there's a few lifestyle groups that I had attended in the area, including the pagan community out there, as far as that's concerned, and college campuses and their situations at that time. And so a lot of people, I'm going to guesstimate, it's not the same thing, but I'm going to guesstimate, because of the college campuses and those rioting that they've done, I would guesstimate that in reference to the 6th of January 2021, I could see people questioning, why would it be okay for college students to do what they did in the state of California and other locations where they've blockaded? You have the references from the 1960s and 1970s onward. Why would it be considered acceptable in certain references regarding college students, though because of being Republicans, as to the 6th of January, why would that ever be considered a problem? I could see where some people might think that in that reference. And so when you take in consideration how in mainly Democrat-run cities, where they have allowed college students and college graduates to do those types of situations, in comparison, yes, there has been the Million Man March and other peaceful protests where various backgrounds as to not just ethnicity, though also voting records, have peacefully demonstrated. And yet, after however many decades of seeing college students going and making the choice where city officials don't do anything, I could easily see where individuals, as to after the 2020 election and the peaceful protests in comparison to the other side as to how riots have been regarding the Democratic Party in certain references, as to those factors. When you have someone such as AOC as to how she has handled certain situations, and you compare to the Republican Party and the amount of media attention, in the addition to Hollywood, as to those particular factors, I wouldn't be surprised, reviewing now in the year 2022, if there were individuals who, well, what's the difference? Because if college students are allowed to do that, why is it that they're allowed to do that in comparison? If you have different protests, however they turn, whether they remain peaceful or go to riots, I could easily see that particular factor. And so since it's mainly Republicans, that anytime a Republican takes a stand, and yet anytime a Democrat goes and causes a riot, that's a double standard in those references. And so the equality for all in comparison to what's considered as favored. Then when you take in consideration in the 2016 election, you have individuals that were part of what's considered the silent majority. Well, that obviously would translate in some references to people who were in the Democratic Party and or who voted for who became POTUS of the United States of America, Barack Obama, and had voted for 45, Donald Trump, the President of the United States of America, 45. I could easily see that particular factor in a bit of a comparison. Now, in reference to my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, and the updates that in my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, on my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribelle.com, the reference to the 2008 and 2012 election cycles as to those particular factors to take into consideration. And so I had personally dealt with quite a bit. I brought it forward in regards of discussions in person, face-to-face in person, though also in reference to finding a silver lining. And again, you can find that in my book section, though I did do the Dropbox link. And so you have these particular situations where the double standard is not equal. It's not a balance of power in that way when you take certain things into consideration. Now, when you look in reference to scuba diving, okay, I'm not a certified scuba dive instructor. However, I earned more specialties than any scuba dive instructor in the civilian recreational area has ever been required to earn before I landed at the bottom of the oceanic waters, whether in reference to the Gulf of Mexico and or the Atlantic area of the ocean. And so in regards of international and that particular grouping of individuals, well, I've already also updated those factors. And while I've given my biases, because I've had to, especially because of having dated two different scuba divers. So having dated two different scuba divers, not during the time frame of earning my scuba diving certification, but having to do that because of the way the military aspects are, there is that difference in comparison to that similarity of the college student types as to the international aspect in comparison. Because when you take in consideration, yes, I dated an individual in reference to Cozumel and I had saved his life, so I have to be in that capacity of brutally honest in every situation because of the legalities. That doesn't take away certain things, though I do have to be honest if being unbiased in truth, because of the way, especially when you consider actual attorneys in those references. There's not the capacity for me to be as harsh in regards of any other area without being as harsh, even with the, and then the special aspect as to 2019 and how that went regarding the Clear Springs Scuba Park area. There's not the capacity where I could go soft on that. Not if I'm going to lead by example at all. The same thing in regards to other factors. And while, yes, the reality, blood is thicker than water, so on and so forth, having to acknowledge those factors in a genuine way. And so when you take in consideration my Medal of Honor art project, well, I've acknowledged the biases in regards of. So just because, in reference to such as my ex-in-laws, well, just because they're aspects as to connections to the armed forces, it doesn't change the fact that they're still my ex-in-laws. They have their biases that obviously would be capable to be proven in whatever capacity of, which officially would negate them from ever being allowed on any trip regarding my Medal of Honor art project trips ever without actually speaking with me. They could not ever speak with my son and ever get permission from him because it wasn't his project, it's mine. Again, in reference to the technological aspects, that's a privacy law and those mandatory factors. So in comparison to those democratic individual types where they have those particular leniencies, you can see in the Republican Party, it doesn't matter whether you've been a long-time Republican or not, they go after equally. In that comparison to where that Democrat, especially because of those college student types, where you see that. And so you have to take, in my opinion, you have to take in consideration those particular factors. And so while Democrats, of course, in my opinion and guesstimation, they would jump at those particular chances. Well, what is it in their background before they ever go to throw a stone, proverbially? The country of the United States of America was founded on Judeo-Christian values. It's not one specific religion, it's Judeo-Christian. So by the Judeo-Christian aspects and not one specific religion over another, it technically, by those standards of, would have that equality because of Judeo-Christian. So Jewish and Christian, that is the reality. So it's not one particular sect of Judaism or one particular sect of Christianity. There are certain equal across the board laws as far as that's concerned. The other sectors are as they are. However, similarly, not the exact same way in reference to Democrat and Christian, but you have that in regards of Democrat and Republican to Jewish and Christian. And those particular situations. So in the reference to the 6th of January, for these metaphors to relate to the particular hearings on the 13th of June, 2022, again, today is the 14th of June, 2022, taking that into consideration, there is the mandatory aspect. And if there were people in the state of Texas and or any connections thereof that decided on their own, whether in reference to my Medal of Honor art project trips and or time before my Medal of Honor art project trips, as to those particular types of problems as to that college student garbage. Well, you still have to get permission. And so why would it be mandatory for Republicans to go and have to get various levels as to those particular citating paperwork in comparison to what Democrats have gotten away with, especially regarding college students? There is the knowledge that in regards to Hollywood, they've done the pop-up sort of situation in comparison to at a specific location, and that is obviously a Democratic in that reference too. So I could easily see in regards to different individuals, I'm not condoning it, let me add that, I am pointing out the situations as to why. You can easily see across those sectors. So my ex-in-laws are not exempt just because one individual happened to have been in the Air Force. As a matter of fact, it would be a worse situation for them because of my original Blue ID card as to that particular factor. Now, in reference to the 2000 year and the I love you virus, so there's the situation regarding how I had sent a text or a page through the pager because of my company commander at the time. And I thought of it in an overall sort of way because I actually remembered something from before my head injury on Palm Sunday in 2000, which was 8 tree 1. 8 letters, tree words, 1 meeting. Now, I did not ever know about the I love you virus. However, in reference to the collection of data over the decades, well before I was born, obviously, those particular situations as to, I don't know when that phone call was, that I had explained that to my company commander at the time, as to medical hold unit. I wouldn't know. And so when you take in consideration the possibility as to my Blue ID card, the original one, and my ex-in-laws, it doesn't matter that the legal divorce didn't occur. They know it was a second and final separation. And even still, it doesn't matter that I had been legally married because of the fact of they were informed as to the justice of the peace and how that occurred. They also were informed in regards to my subarachnoid hemorrhage in the frontal lobe of my brain, and I didn't know those people. They're not anybody that I knew. I had only met my children's biological father less than a full year from the time frame in 2001 that I had met those people, so they had no legal right nor any authority to ever have my original Blue ID card in any capacity. It doesn't matter if it's my ex-brother-in-law who decided to tell his wife, which is my ex-sister-in-law, and or the 2 trifling daughters of that particular, in my opinion, I have to clarify, but Sandra and Ariel, they don't have any right. I'm not their friend. I don't know them. I'm not interested in even knowing them back then or now. And while they might feel that they have a right, they didn't at all in any capacity. I don't care if Grandpa Nichols himself had told them to do so. In any capacity, that might actually make it worse in those references because of the fact that I'm not their family, obviously, in every situation of. And so the possibilities, yes, that my biological mother and or biological father and or biological little sister may have figured that out or what have you in that, it doesn't change those facts as to those people, as to my ex-in-laws. They're not my family. They haven't ever been my family. They won't ever be my family. And that's the facts. That's the reality. While they might feel otherwise, the reality is the reality, especially with the proof. And so when you take in consideration as to the fact that in the January 6th hearings as to Georgia having been brought up, they're not my family. They have no right to be on my trips during my Medal of Honor project. They have no right to involve themselves in my life whatsoever in any capacity of. Not back in the year 2000 or 2001 or since then or onward at any capacity. I'm the one and only sponsor, and with the fact that I have the Blue ID card situation, obviously they legally would not have any right or authority at all because of the knowledge of me being the one and only sponsor. So those people would have absolutely no right, absolutely no authority, and there is the fact of the modern day book regarding. So while those people might wish that they would have an exemption, they actually would not in any way, in any shape, and in any form. In comparison, whereas my biological mother and biological father and biological little sister would have more leniency, but again, having to acknowledge that, those particular individuals, as to my ex-in-laws, would not have ever had any right nor any authority ever. in reference to my standards. And that's the most important part. So while in regards as to the 2020 election cycle and the knowledge as to the site regarding how many, well, then there is the software situation. So in regards of my original Blue ID card, if it was ever scanned, after the I love you virus in that hypothetical as to the technology such as AI, having heard that in regards of Old Tenet Presbyterian Church afterwards at Asher Holmes Elementary School when I spoke, as well as the Build-A-Bear situation on top of other factors, those people, in my opinion, would be the catalyst as to certain other problems, which would be capable to be found in reference to the attacks on the 11th of September 2001, especially if the pattern of behavior had continued onward in regards to my Medal of Honor art project trip and or anything else at all in any capacity. So then in conjunction to that, regarding the January 6th hearings as to the year of 2021 when that occurred, but in regards of the second hearing, the 13th of June, 2022, today is the 14th of June, 2022, those factors as to the Old Dominion software. Well, would that be in reference to the Old Dominion Trucking Company and that connection in hypothetical aspects as to that being a different version as to 9/11 because of the month of September regarding my scuba diving as to the Vandenberg? Because those individuals would not have any right nor any authority to ever be involved with anything at all regarding my scuba diving. And if their complaints, again, having to be with tips, that has nothing of any bearing to them having any rights to, in any capacity whatsoever. I didn't ever give them authority. I didn't ever give them any rights. And it doesn't matter what company they might work for. They don't have the right or authority to involve themselves. I didn't ever ask them to, especially in regards to my own personal research on myself. That wasn't an invitation for anybody else to get involved at all. Not the Jewish Medical Journal individuals, not the UK Medical Journal individuals, not international, not any other scuba diver in the slightest. There was no invitation. It's not a free-for-all. That would be ignorant, obviously. And then that college student problem yet again, because when you have no idea what the foundational portions are, you don't have the capability to backtrace, because that's not allowed. You wouldn't be allowed that information at all. So then there's that factor as to the Republicans regarding the 6th of January situation, where you would have to hold every Democrat accountable for any situation regarding any rioting that occurred. You cannot, in my opinion, and I would guesstimate others, you cannot continue the 6th of January hearings unless you are willing to prosecute each and every Democrat, each and every college student that has ever been a part of a riot or a public disturbance by choice, and or when you take in consideration Montana in the year 2017 as to those traffic situations, which can be taken in consideration to the 6th of January regarding that factor. That hasn't been taken care of, but you want to go in reference to that. That's across state lines from Washington State and Idaho State, obviously. So those particular situations as to any aspects of, when I brought up in my journal blog updates regarding the ornery PSA on my website, www.susanmealing.com, as to those factors before the 6th of January, there's also the merger regarding T-Mobile and Sprint and those situations. So if the 6th of January hearings are to continue, okay, but there better be the prosecution of each and every Democrat just as equally, in my opinion, regarding those situations as to the year 2017 in regards of the Montana trip, regarding my Medal of Honor art project and any other things that would be found. As far as the Old Dominion software situation, again, in the year 2000, you have the individuals who brought that forward as to Florida. Now, I don't know, and I'm being honest, I don't know if 45 knew the Democratic individual at the time frame of. I don't know what connections as to the technological conglomerates as to 45 regarding Donald J. Trump or any other factors to those references. I don't know that. I didn't even know about The Apprentice until I think it was the year 2019. So even though I had written regarding my journal blog, The Ornery PSA, in 2015 and 2016, I did not know anything about any Hollywood sort of situation. However, when you take in consideration the 2020 election cycle, you do have those situations to take into consideration. And so in those particular references as to the 2020 election compared to the year of 2000, well, I know that I don't want to get involved in politics. And yes, I know elections have to do with politics, but there's a difference in that capacity, in my opinion. However, I am known for taking a stand when there are certain things that need to be paid attention to. And so then there are those particular factors. And so while individuals have seen over the years from the 1990s more specifically to the younger generations, and yes, the elder generations too, but especially the younger ones, you have the 1990s regarding the Clintons, you have the Bushes, that is the knowledge, you have the vice presidents of as well. And then you have the Obamas and the Bidens, though Trump and Pence, and Harris. And so in those particular references to take in consideration what I brought up in the 2008 election cycle, well, the commander-in-chief is supposed to be as unbiased as possible regarding the armed forces of the United States of America. And as I brought up in reference to the Commander-in-Chief of the United States of America, which is supposed to be the President of the United States of America, being in charge of, in my opinion, needing to have a military background specifically because of being Commander-in-Chief. However, there is the capacity of taking in consideration that, and I said this in 2008, that's why I voted for McCain and Palin. Because McCain has the military background as to that time frame. I did not have, it's not that I didn't think Palin couldn't do the job, more along the lines of I knew back then, partially the female portion that was being brought forward, though also in reference to the amount of work in the Oval Office areas to the White House, though along with Congress and Senate. And there is the difference in regards to, and not in any offense towards her at all. I'm sure that she would have been capable, as she probably has been, to learn far more about the various levels of. Though in reference to the 2008 election, I did say that was a big deal because I was concerned that if 44 really, who was going to become 44 and who is 44, if he did not have a military background and his vice president didn't have a military background specifically, that I could see being issues regarding, as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of the United States of America, because of the way the wording is when certain situations need to be taken into consideration, especially on an emergency basis. Because sometimes, even though, yes, the uniforms are as the uniforms are, it does not change the fact that if there is an emergency situation, the Secret Service, the different branches and divisions, they're not going to care whether you want the words pretty or not. What they are going to care about is getting the job done correctly. And so in those particular references, I don't know if there's any situations regarding the technology factors, though it has been brought forward as to the Old Dominion software. Then there's also the factors as to scuba diving. And yes, there are the situations as to Irving 2011, among others. And there is the formation of the U.S. Space Force. NASA has been around for a while, obviously, but as through the government contracts, because of the various levels of NDAs or non-disclosure agreements, as to those particular situations as well. And so, in regards of Marine and Science Technology School with the Navy attachment, others would be capable to verify in regards to those situations as to background checks and clearances, though also in reference to handling situations if in the civilian sector certain things not having been taken care of in an appropriate amount of time. So officially the appropriate amount of time would have been as to August of 2009 to December 31st, 2009. And then the 10-year as to the anything that occurred in the water couldn't be discussed because of, and it would be natural to someone who had certain aspects and understanding and or comprehension. So with that, there's also those facts as to clearances because of the formation of the U.S. Space Force, whatever year that paperwork actually initially began. So taking that into consideration, despite it having been signed into office in the year of 2020. And there's those situations in addition to take into consideration. And so while in the time frame from June all the way through to August, I had repeatedly brought up that yes, I landed at the bottom of the Gulf of Mexico each and every scuba dive that I had been on. I had brought up in person, face-to-face in person, not through email, not through phone calls, not through texts, in person, face-to-face in person, regarding my concern as to not just the individual who had caught the poofy fish, but also the others, or puffer fish. I know that's the more common name, but it poofed up. Is it a poofy? Nonetheless, I brought that forward, and International, similar to Democrats, made the choices that they had. If he, regarding Sean Leonard, had brought it up to Scuba Toys, because I didn't go to Scuba Toys, if he brought it up or if he chose not to, I was the only person to bring that forward. And I made attempts, not just with him, though also international. Anybody who knew me in person, face-to-face in person, regarding 2009 through 2012, and ever heard me repeat anything about, well, if I talked about scuba diving, I would have brought up the poofy fish. as far as I was concerned, and my concern for. But because, yeah, I acknowledge, not a scuba dive instructor. I earned 26 scuba diving certifications. There's no bureaucracy. There's no red tape regarding that. That's on everybody else. That's their choices. That's those factors in comparison. And so if instead, because, okay, I landed at the bottom of the oceanic area as to the trench regarding where the Vandenberg is above where that is, nonetheless, it doesn't change the facts. That obviously, if there was the seriousness about scuba diving, it would have been seen in reference to that individual regarding NAUI. Then you have the situations in reference to the Vandenberg, and in comparison of taking things seriously, what the choices were. That was not something to hesitate on. I did not hesitate. So in regards to the 6th of January, well, you know what? That happened in 2021, the 6th of January. This is the 14th of June, 2022. There is the reality where the country of the United States of America can obviously tell that there is a difference between 2009 to 2019, and that is in the civilian sector regarding scuba diving and whatever they informed elected officials of and or college students that they had absolutely no right to be involved with to begin with. As far as my scuba diving, those factors as to justice in those references across the board is definitely something additionally to take in consideration. And yes, while in regards of the updates to the background checks, well, what does that say regarding background checks? As far as the viewpoint. So, yes, if in regards to you have the amount of people, how many people showed up to the DC area in regards to the ellipse? What is the number regarding the overall people before the building? And would those individuals be capable in reference to the numerical voting situation? Now, yes, you have the silent majority problem that I brought up in my updates regarding being truthful. Because then taking consideration, how are you going to vote in regards to, yes, you have the right to your privacy, but then think about that. Your right to privacy, but yet my Medal of Honor art project trips and or anything else regarding from the time frame of. What does that say as far as? What levels of hypocrisy does that show to the individuals of? What is that to take into consideration in truth? Not with just the biased aspect. Because Democrats nowadays, any Democrat that voted for 45, they no longer can claim, as they had before, as to the party line situation. Doesn't matter if they were a part of the silent majority or they came out and said that they were a Trump supporter. Now they no longer have the capacity to do so in the ways that they've done before. So there is the Northern Democrats and the Coastal Democrats in comparison to the Southern Democrats and the Midwestern Democrats to take into consideration because of those viewpoints. Because it's obviously registered what the votes were. So in 2020, as per my journal blog, the Ornery PSA, as to the updates, those individuals that, whether they stayed as registered Democrats or they switched over to Republican, if they voted for 45 to become President of the United States of America, and they have ever filed for some sort of FOIA version or FOIA request, automatically I can see with the merger factor as to those facts, where the requirement to be genuine and truthful, especially with the foundation of the Judeo-Christian background as to the United States of America. It is not a violation of the Constitution or the amendments of the United States of America, by the way, because even with the amendment, as to it says a specific religion. The United States of America was founded on Judeo-Christian principles. Automatically, the 10 Commandments remain, and you can see that as to the references regarding legal aspects, in my opinion. So, there is the proverbial term, monkey see, monkey do. Well, 45 apparently had television shows that were considered reality TV shows, however you consider reality TV. What would that be in that reference? Though, can't hold 45 accountable in the same capacities when you take in consideration Hollywood in those references. And the known factors as to many college students. Not all, of course. There are obviously the groups such as Young Republicans and Turning Point, though there are the facts as to how certain things have been over the decades. So in my opinion, in those references, there's quite a bit to take into consideration. And after having listened to the hearing, in my thoughts, this is a viewpoint. A bit long-winded, admittedly. However, quite a few metaphors to take into consideration. So, thank you for tuning in to my official YouTube channel. Make sure to subscribe to my official YouTube channel. Share the links to my official YouTube channel videos. If you're going to leave a comment, please make sure to have etiquette and respect. Go to my website, www.susanmealing.com, which is the same as www.ladydoribelle.com, and do go look through my journal blog, The Ornery PSA. You can see from the updates a different version as to the timelines. You guys have a good day. Today is the 14th of June, 2022. 14 June 2022.